Hey homies, so I had the luxury to be able to actually go to the theaters in my city after like so long. So I went with my friends like a week and a half ago and we watched Candyman, and honestly the movie was so good, and I was like, I haven't done a movie analysis or like breakdown on my channel in a minute. I mean, I made a video again about Malcolm and Marie, but like everybody's over Malcolm and Marie. So I decided, let's talk about some of the themes and topics that this movie touches upon, because it really did kind of like touch close to home, like as much as it's a black narrative. And I'm not black, so I'm not gonna sit here and act like I know. There were some themes that I could just relate to in terms of like stuff that I've been seeing happening in my city and whatnot. But anyways, let's get into the video and let's break down this wonderful movie that if you have not watched, you most definitely should. And you should not watch this video unless you have actually watched the movie first, because I'm going to spoil it and I'm going to be adjusting the movie as if you have already seen it. But yeah, let's get to it. Okay, so disclaimer. In this video, I'm focusing more on the themes and topics that the movie touches upon and giving more of an analysis on the social commentary of the film. Although I will touch a little bit on the techniques that are used throughout the movie to portray this story, this video is less about the elements of film and techniques used in the movie, but more again on the actual storyline. So without further ado, let's get into it. First of all, I do want to say that in my opinion, Candyman is neither a hero nor a villain. He is a product of what was done to him. In the second movie of the Candyman series, which is called Farewell to the Flesh, Candyman actually says himself at one point of the movie that he is a manifestation of hatred and evil after all the terrible things that he had to endure before he passed away. He's seeking for vengeance. Obviously, he wants to get back at those who have killed him and keep his legend and his spirit alive through people chanting his name over and over again. And in a way, he does protect the black community because he preserves their neighborhood. As long as they say his name 5 times, he'll kill anybody. So what Anthony does throughout the movie is he has multiple white people chant Candyman's name in curiosity, who don't actually care about Candyman's story and who don't actually give a shit about Anthony's artwork, but are just foolishly curious, as white people do be. And they're also ignorant. And he gets every single one of them. He gets Clive. He gets the mean art curator who literally bashes Anthony's work because she cannot see the beauty behind it. And he also gets the white girl and her friends in the high school. So he does protect the community in certain ways. But again, he also isn't exactly a hero because he'll kill anybody who says his name 5 times. He has killed William Burke's sister, who was obviously just a child. And we especially see this in the original film. Anybody who said Candyman 5 times in the mirror got absolutely castrated by him. So he's neither or, but in a way, he is a protector, and that's what William Burke sees in him, and that's exactly why he wants to reincarnate him and have Anthony continue the legend of Candyman. This film does an amazing job of touching on the topic of generational trauma. Generational trauma is still a very new topic in the psychological world. It is still something that is being heavily studied, how we can discover generational trauma in individuals, how we can tackle it, how we can overcome it. But it's also something that a lot of people just believe is not true, when it very much is. Just like William Burke says to Anthony, Candyman is not a he. Candyman is the whole hive, which basically means that Candyman is a representation of every single black man who was killed unjustly. The residents of Cabrini Green as a whole decided after Anthony was saved by Helen Lyle years ago that they would never say the name Candyman ever again, so that they could discontinue the killings that were going around in their neighborhood. But they were all very much traumatized from this experience. And they know that Candyman is coming back from their ancestry. Candyman being an African American who was killed unjustly, he lives in each of them. He's a representation of the injustice that they face, and each of them are heavily affected by his story, not just by him showing up and killing people, but by his story in particular, because they know that his story repeats itself in every single generation that comes. And although no one wants to say his name, because of course he is an evil spirit who will kill anybody who chants his name in the mirror, William Burke and Anthony for a little bit do want people to say his name because of what he represents. He represents the lived experiences of black people, the trauma that Black people have faced. And it is usually white people who are always telling people of color and minority groups to just let things go, let things from the past go, and stop talking about it. Stop trying to bring the past back into the present, even though we all know that the past plays a big role in our present day. And you cannot just turn off things from the past and act as if they have never happened, especially when they still have an effect on people to this day. So by saying his name, you keep his legend alive. You keep his story alive. And that whole slogan in the film, Say His Name, is very similar to Say His Name, which was used during the Black Lives Matter movement, because we want to remember these victims and we want to remember what they've been through and not just forget it and push it under a rug, because once we do that, we allow these things to happen over and over and over again. The interesting thing about generational trauma is that it's not talked about. The whole community can face generational trauma and never speak about it ever. And that's exactly what the residents of Cabrini Green do. They don't want to talk about it. They push it under a rug. They keep it silent. And I believe that they do this not just so that the Candyman doesn't reappear and slaughter the person who repeats his name over and over again, but also so that they could forget and put behind them the trauma that they exhibit from their ancestors and from their own lives and the things that they've seen themselves. The reason why I think it is so genius that Candyman is neither a good guy or a bad guy is because at the end of the day, he represents trauma. And it doesn't even matter who he was as a person before he died. It's the fact that he died the way that he did that people will always be affected by. Because why did he get killed for what he did? Of course, at the time when he was alive, it was illegal to do anything with a white woman as a Black man, let alone have a whole child. But he was single-handedly killed because he fathered a child with a white woman. That's not good enough reason to kill somebody. While I was watching this film with my friends, one of my friends actually turned around to me and she was like, "Girl, this is 3D." And I'm like, "No, babe, this is 4D. Growing up in Toronto City, I have been seeing gentrification since I was a kid, but I've been seeing it take over this entire city. And I think every major city in the States and in Canada, like Toronto City, is going through a lot of gentrification, and it's very heartbreaking to watch. And it's a major theme in this film. When white people come up with plans to gentrify these neighborhoods in these major cities, they are always going in with the intention of bettering these neighborhoods, developing them, and making them better for the people who live in them. But what they're actually doing is kicking out the residents of that particular neighborhood, which is usually people of color, Black communities, and other visible minorities, and replacing them with buildings that none of us can afford. And only white people are the ones designing these neighborhoods and breaking down the buildings and the monuments that we have created in these communities. And it is very devastating to watch, to see how these groups of people get placed into these corners of the city. And in this film, particularly talking about Black communities being pushed into these corners where they don't have the resources that they need or the quality of life that they deserve. Their buildings are broken up. They face issues like poverty, pest control, violence, and things of the such. And then a group of white people just come and kick them out, clean the neighborhood up, and then they are displaced and they don't have this community at least to return to, because what people forget is that in the hood, there's families, regular people just trying to get about life, and not everything is about being poor and facing violence and struggling. It's also just a home to many people that gets tarnished and replaced by wealthy white people, and people of color who actually used to live there can no longer afford to be there. Anthony and his girlfriend live in a really luxurious apartment that is built on the old Cabrini Green projects, and he becomes very intrigued with the story of the Candyman and how he affected the people of Cabrini Green, not knowing that he himself was actually born in the neighborhood of Cabrini Green. In his art piece, he explores how gentrification basically forgets the stories of the people who had originally lived in these neighborhoods and kicks them out, allowing white people to move in and do whatever they please with these neighborhoods after basically alienating the communities who have originally lived in these neighborhoods. I love how in the film he becomes so interested with gentrification even though he lives in one of the gentrified buildings, because as a Black man, he knows that even though he can afford to live in one of these luxurious condos, his people very much suffered from the effects of gentrification. It's also very interesting that the white woman who takes a look at his artwork cannot seem to understand what it is that he's trying to portray, and actually tells him that the real people that gentrify these neighborhoods are young artists who choose to live in poor areas so that they can pay cheap rent and then just reinvent them as they please, when the truth is that it is white artists who are picked to gentrify these neighborhoods and take over these neighborhoods. Her whole like explanation to gentrification was just like so garbage and so delusional. I was like, girl, like, I get it. You don't know because you don't know, but like, you sound dumb. Like, you could just shut up. Clive is also very interesting to me because he also doesn't get the work at all. Like, he doesn't seem to understand the meaning behind Anthony's artwork. Everybody is so concerned with prestige and high class that they can't look at Anthony's art and see what it represents. And I kind of wanted to talk about how art is a form of expression, and people forget how actually important that is. People forget that art can be anything anybody wants it to be, and it is very much a reflection of the times that we live in and the people who live in the times that we live in, and also the effects of the past on the times that we live in right now. I have been hearing a lot of especially white artists complain about how films, movies, articles, artwork are also political now, and everything is so political now, and we can't just have art that's enjoyable. But the thing is, art is a way of expressing what people are feeling inside, and what people are feeling inside are things like the trauma that they faced, the lived experiences of their communities and such. And it's so important to remember those things so we can reflect on our society and do better for the future, so that we don't forget what we've been through in the past and why we are where we are today. This was also a perfect example of how white people profit off of Black people's work, because the white curator woman did not even care about his artwork until it started to pick up and take off and it became very popular amongst people. That's when she wanted to know more. That's when she wanted to know his inspiration. That's when she wanted to actually understand the piece. But prior to that, she had no interest whatsoever, and she actually bashed the artwork because she couldn't even understand it. She couldn't relate to it whatsoever. And I think a lot of people do that when we don't understand something, when we don't know about something. Instead of like actually trying to expand our perspective and see things from someone else's perspective, we just shut the whole shit down entirely. And people also forget that as much as art is escapism in a lot of forms, it doesn't always have to be a escape from reality. It can also be a really big reality check. And to take away that element of art is a total injustice to the actual power that art has. And that's exactly what the people around Anthony want to do. They want to silence him as an artist. They want to take away his form of expression. They want to shut down the story that he's telling of the Candyman. And of course, at a certain point near the end of the movie, Anthony's like, I think I made a mistake. I brought back to life this evil, vengeful spirit. But in this film in particular, we see how the Candyman does take his revenge out on white people in specific, and we also understand how he's sort of seen as a protector to the Black community in certain ways, especially at the end when he protects Brianna from the police officers and also gets his revenge for Anthony by killing the police officers. In the original film, which I have yet to watch, but I have done a lot of reading about, he is more so just an evil, vengeful spirit that kills not just white people, but a lot of Black people too. He's just, again, a product of the evil and the racism that he had to face. But this movie definitely does shy away from the original movie in that sense, where it focuses more on the effects of Candyman on the Black community. So to conclude, Candyman 2021 is a story that has so many layers to it, so much symbolism, so much representation of the themes that I have talked about throughout this video, and I highly recommend that anybody watching this video goes and checks it out for themselves. I love the symbolism that was used throughout the film, such as when Anthony gets stung by a bee and we see this bee get carried away by a bunch of ants. I think that's a representation of how the Black community of Cabrini Green carried on Candyman's spirit, or had to live with what happened to him and internalize that for generations to come. The mirror is a very clear reflection of self, and Anthony starts to see the Candyman every time he looks in the mirror because he recognizes that the Candyman lives within him. And I feel like in a way that also represents how generational trauma is within all of us, whether we can see it in the mirror or not, it's there. I do also want to point out that this is a Black narrative film, so me not being a Black person, there's so much that I just won't be able to understand just because I don't have that place of understanding to come from. So please do check out articles about this film if you're more curious, that are written by Black people who can give you a more genuine insight into how this story is a reflection of what the Black community is going through today.